This is the day I die. Yeah, see, doesn't quite work as a cold open if I'm not actually dead by the end of this, does it? Although, boy, just laid a lot of suspense in there. So, hey! Finale for Series 2 of Doctor Who, the two-parter, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. Boy, this is one I was looking forward to, but also very nervous about because I do enjoy it, and I know that I like it, but I also know that every time I rewatch it, I remember the little things that don't quite work, that I tend to forget, which I think speaks both to sort of a little bit of weakness of the story, but also sort of the nature of Russell T Davies as a storyteller and sort of his way of approaching Doctor Who. Because whereas Moffat later on will become much more interested in sort of the little mechanisms, you know, the narrative tricks, and also the sort of nuts and bolts, Davies was always much more focused on the bigger emotional picture, so that it was not uncommon coming away from a Davies scripted episode to go, you know, I could nitpick the heck out of it, but I'm not sure I want to because that was a lot of fun and it had a good emotional impact. And he's kind of counting on the emotional weight of what he's done to gloss over other issues. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. I feel it does here. But what are some of those issues? Let's acknowledge that. Well, let's start with the top. The whole framing thing of Rose on the beach and the whole this is the story where I die or whatever it is completely unnecessary and stupid and pointless. And honestly, I forget that it's in there until I watch it again. Like, it was completely unnecessary. I know they were trying to instill a sense of dread around this episode, but I actually think it plays much better if her getting stuck in the parallel world wasn't foreshadowed all to heck. I mean, granted, they foreshadowed her death, which is also got a cheap thing where it's like, oh, well, you're listed among the dead because they never found you. That's really dumb. But then beyond that, just foreshadowing that something bad's going to happen to her, I don't think improves the impact of that moment. I think that moment would play better as a complete rug pull. And the moment of her getting trapped over there does work very well. Let me be clear. But that whole thing at the front end, not necessary and doesn't help. It's funny, I was prepared to go off on one about the previously on from the previous episode, or not previously on, next time on from the previous episode, which was Fear Her, because that had, you know, little bits of just showing the Cybermen in it. And normally I'd have complained about that, except that the Cybermen do actually show up about 15 minutes in, which is pretty early into the runtime. So I'm okay with that. Thankfully, they didn't spoil the Daleks showing up, because that was a good reveal, especially, you know, this early in the show's life where we're not yet used to the patterns of course they come back. They always come back, and they come back every stinking friggin' year. So it was kind of nice to see them brought back in a way that wasn't yet being undercut by the repetitiveness of the Daleks coming back, which sort of impacts later stories a little bit. What else we got? So in terms of, like, there's, like, little weird quirks of the pacing of the story. So, like, Tennant waves a little white flag in front of the Cybermen and says he surrenders. And then next time we see him, he's just strolling in, talking to the Daleks, and then he, like, blows open a door and the Cybermen come and start fighting the Daleks. Like, I'm gonna assume, because there's no other conclusion for me to draw, that he somehow talked the Cybermen into teaming up with him. But that's honestly a really big leap to request an audience to make from the point at which we last saw the Doctor to the point at which we next see him and what had to happen in between. That's a big dot to leave to the audience to connect on their own. I'm not sure it totally works. At least when you stop and think about it, because, again, Davies, so it does work in the sense of it's such a yeah moment that you don't really necessarily stop and think about it unless you're doing it on a rewatch. like I do. Although I do remember noticing that before. We get Torchwood, which is kind of interesting how it's played out here. And the various people within it. It's very, it feels like a very, we're just here to do the job. Plus, the one person at the top who's very into the patriotism of it all. We get a bit of Jackie and Pete. I don't remember ever being kind of choked up and a little bit touched about the two of them meeting for the first, this version of Jackie and this version of Pete meeting for the first time. But no, that worked surprisingly well. There was something about the conflict that each of them had about knowing this wasn't truly the same person who they loved and lost, but it is so close that they can't help but get swept up in it. That was surprisingly touching. So that was nice. Mickey back, awesome. And there's just, like I said, there's a lot of little things that are just a little bit off. The whole thing with the ghosts and people, accepting it, and Jackie even being like, why do you have to spoil it? Why can't it be real? I don't know if Davies is like trying to make a jab at faith, not specifically like a specific religion, but like faith in general. The idea of wanting to believe so hard. It feels like he thought he had a point there, but it's just kind of there and isn't really developed into much of anything. There's the offhanded dig on Harriet Jones, which I don't care for because I think Harriet Jones got the short shrift by this show and by this doctor. We get sort of the first instance of Allons-y and sort of his little fascination with it, which was cool. I forgot it had originated with this one. And, I mean, overall, this is just a lot of fun. This doesn't, after the Daleks get revealed, this doesn't really do anything unexpected. It doesn't really do anything unexpected prior to that, and it doesn't really have any more tricks up its sleeve. But it is just fun, and it's okay for something to be fun. And also, it is fairly impressive that for something that is kind of a rollicking good time, that it does still have that emotional impact of the back end of when Rose is trapped on the other side of that wall in the other dimension. Because it can be tricky sometimes when something that has just been, a rollicking good time to try and milk, really heavy and blatant emotions out of the audience. That can be a hard needle to thread, and I think it does it pretty well. And I think part of the reason it does is because what you realize is that this was almost kind of the inevitable result of how cavalier and blasé and treating everything like it was nothing but a fun adventure that the Doctor and Rose have been doing for pretty much this whole series. It's not dissimilar to when Clara passed away the first time in Face the Raven. That felt very much like the inevitable conclusion of her trying to be the Doctor, which was something that had been alluded to and sort of built up over the course of that series. And I think there's a similar thing going on here where people have even pointed out to them, you guys are too, you don't take this seriously enough for what it is that you're doing. And this consequence feels like an inevitable sad conclusion to how they've been living their lives. And I think that's part of the reason why that shift works from the fun of seeing Cybermen and Daleks just, shout at each other for a few minutes before trying and blow each other up with the more emotional gut punches of the tail end. So I think, for as much as I will always say this series is very up and down and very uneven and very wonky, that specific thread running through that thematic thing, as opposed to, the mystery box of, ooh, Torchwood, ooh, how's that gonna be, which I don't like and I never have. But that sort of thematic linking and payoff in the finale, that I actually quite admire. And I like that quite a bit. I'm not sure I've got too much else to say about it. It's just a good time with a strong emotional conclusion and a lot of like little bumps in the middle that at least for me, in my memory, they smooth out basically within minutes of me having watched an episode of it. Or having, finished watching this story. Like, yeah, there were problems, but like, I can't remember them now. They don't seem that important. And what you're left with is the sense of fun and the sadness, and that's what ultimately should linger. So, and while I would never claim that this is the best series finale, I do think it's a very successful one, especially for what it was trying to do, and at least speaking personally, for what it leaves behind. Because what it leaves behind is the feelings and the emotions, and not the nitpicks. At least not for me. So, that wraps up Series 2, Doomsday and the Army of Ghosts. This two-parter. Oh God. I'll just mention this real quick, because this is like a weird thing for me. We also have Freema Agyeman, here, not playing Martha, later revealed to be Martha's cousin. What is it with movies and TV shows, the concept of identical cousins, or like identical, relatives, but who aren't twins? That's such a movie and TV thing. It's ridiculous. And I know, like, I'm pretty sure she hadn't been cast as Martha yet at the time that she was cast to do this, but it's so ridiculous. Anyway, what are your thoughts on it? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff down there, too, because there's buttons and links, including one to the Patreon. The support is greatly appreciated. It helps keep this thing going. I've got the P.O. box. There's other links to check out besides, but if you don't want to look at any of them, that's okay, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.